us. Talk to them. I would have liked more people because my feedback about your assignment is really a great improvement in most of the cases. And yes, the formatting was much better, and I can see that there's some progression of thought. And you're adding to what you learned in the first phase, and so I was quite pleased with what I found. And the marks were also obviously reflected in that way. And I just need to pull my computer a little closer because that's it. I've got two screens. Now I'm looking at the wrong one now. Now I'm looking at the right one. Cole, can you answer it?
Yep.
Okay, right. So, now we get back from your information that you gathered after the case study, and that's going to take a bit of transplanting. Although I think lots of what you found in your research can be applied. And well, most of you said something about how to take this business to market. Some of you had very interesting and valid comments and recommendations to make. So I was quite pleased to see that.
In terms of the length of the feedback, 3 pages again, Doc?
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't want to over elaborate on it. Just be. Okay. That's really par for the course in the industry too. You can easily get yourself into such a wordage mode that the client is finding it difficult to see what you mean. So yes, be to the point, focused, and I mean the assignment is quite specific. Somebody whistled at me.
I think it was a cell phone.
I know that. I hoped it wouldn't be somebody ending up to me.
Gustav?
Okay. Yes.
Quick question. In the question, you said the last sentence is specifically probe the perceptions of delivery versus collecting dry clean clothes. Do you mean delivery and collection?
Yeah.
Okay. So pick up and drop off.
Okay, you're at week 3, right? But so you're looking backwards.
Well,
yeah, that's actually a delivery versus collecting in store. That's what I meant.
Okay, so it's pick up and delivery.
Pick up and delivery versus collecting in the store. So yes, bit of a formulation problem there. And well, it seems that most of you understood it well.
Yes.
Despite my semantic shortcomings there. So yeah, that was what I meant. And not everybody, well, obviously not all the dry cleaners could say something about that because they were just out of it in terms of delivery. Those that are still in bricks and mortar, obviously they didn't have to say something about that, but some considered the idea and responded accordingly, but many of them didn't. I must say that I was surprised to find that in quite a number of cases, the actual cleaning process, the real works of the business was outsourced to somebody else. And so it was really, in many instances, just a front, and they didn't actually have the machines or did it on site. They sent it, and I think one of the you know, one of the companies that are quite well represented also outsource instead of doing it themselves. So that was quite surprising to me. But there were. I really liked your approaches and what I found. So the marks levels in most instances increased a bit. In some cases, those who did well in the first assignment, you wouldn't have seen too much of an increase of marks. But yeah, that's my feedback at this stage.
Was the referencing correct in most cases?
Yes. Here and there were a couple of ones that didn't comply fully with the prescript, but most used references. I was pleasantly surprised at the number of people who used who actually went into probably Googled, gone into the internet and found some very useful cross-cutting industry information on the industry in South Africa. Sales figures, growth, number of operators in the market, differentiating between those that the dry cleaning and wet washing and so on. So yeah, lots of people really did some good work in looking at the industry trends. Couple of assignments only addressed what they found in their discussions, but that was also okay. And so various ways of reporting it. Some people reporting it by breaking down the report in terms of the 3 different companies they visited. Somebody, who was it? Russell was due, I'm not too sure. Somebody actually talked to 5 or 6 different dry cleaners. I can't remember who it was. Nevertheless, and then others combined, looked more or less at the main points and then reported all 3 of the operators or the companies under particular points. So there's different ways of approaching it. But I wasn't too dogmatic about it. But I think in the end, it was clear to me that virtually everybody gained some insight and got a bit of a revelation about the industry.
I have a question about claims and how to substantiate claims, because I made a note of some of the claims that the owners had, or the business owners had made about their laundromats and dry cleaning companies, but there wasn't any, and that was a comment that you made, saying that how could those claims be substantiated? So if it's word of mouth and I've gone to ask them a couple of questions and they've given feedback, how do I put that into the assignment, because I can't make a proper reference of that?
Okay, Peter, that's something that often happens when you do the kind of, I wouldn't call it totally superficial, but relatively exploratory research in the way that you did it. Now, I couldn't expect much more from you, but you would find that quite a number of the respondents would give you socially desirable responses, wanting to please you or wanting to not look bad. And so that's why I said in a couple of instances, I'm not sure whether it was in your assignment specifically, that it seems as if they make claims that I'm not too sure whether they can substantiate it. Nevertheless, if you look across the 3 companies that you interviewed, there could be some convergence, maybe some level of internal validity. If somebody comes in this kind of research and says something totally out of kill, totally out of sync with what the other said, that's easily detectable. And in most of those instances, either the person wants to please you, which is a great problem in research, or they want to get it done, or they want to play a a game where they put up fronting. They want to impress themselves, so to speak. Really, you can only get to the gist of this if the research is a little broader and wider than what you did. But this was, as I said from the beginning, this is really a practice swing. If this was a real research project, specifically aimed at finding deep-seated and validated and reliable information about our industry, obviously it would have been different. But this was just to get a feeling for how you can get your thoughts around what happens in an industry, because looking at the outside, often what seems to be there is not totally representative of the real dynamics of the industry. And I'm quite happy that everybody got stuck into it, at least at an adequate level to make some sense of the industry. And I must say that I not having been exposed to the industry myself, everything that you told me was news to me. I had quite a number of assumptions, and so some of those assumptions were borne out, others were contradicted by what you found in the market, and it was just quite an interesting study that you all did collectively. Obviously, I have the benefit of looking across the cross-cutting view of all the assignments, and so the picture that emerged from the collective effort of all the students was quite interesting and revealing. I think, as you probably also discerned, and most of you also said it, that the strategic literacy in this industry is fairly low. Lots of people find it attractive because the capital outlay is not that much. And so I think quite a number of people just went in it with no particular background or no specifically developed business acumen, and that came out very clearly. And frankly, some of the owners seem to be totally detached, as reported by their employees. Some of the human resource practices are quite shocking. Hey, Ashley, it's your phone.
Switching it off.
So, any other questions for you from you guys?
I have a question.
Yes, Mai, you did quite a comprehensive analysis, so good for you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask in general, when it comes to the South African industry, there seems to be a trend in terms of the way that businesses, especially in the personal services industry, the way that they operate. There seems to be an emergence of industries within industries. As I showed in my assignment, there's this very big brother called Bidvest, and most of the smaller laundries basically send their laundry to be processed to that big company because they've got the ability to spend the kind of money to start a very large laundry and to provide very efficient services in all areas of South Africa. But I'm starting to see that that's happening more and more. So does that mean that in the business arena, in the entrepreneurship space, that the more downstream one goes, the more opportunities there are? Because it seems that when you're in the productive sector, when you actually have a factory and you're producing something, it seems to be very difficult to get in there. Do you notice that trend with other industries as well?
Yeah, as I said a little earlier, I was quite surprised to see the value chain. And incidentally, after I've marked all of your assignments, yesterday in fact, I just happened to drive behind the Bidvest laundry services little van. And I thought, I would never have noticed this if I hadn't seen all of your assignments. Obviously, the whole question of outsourcing, we normally associate that with big business, but it's clear that in this instance you've got very small businesses, small enterprises actually outsourcing, which was quite surprising to me. We don't have the answers, but I was just wondering about the markups of these outsourced companies. Obviously, because they are big, they can play the unit game. The more units they service, the lower the prices can become, which may not necessarily be the case if you're just a lone small operator. So for the dry cleaners, outsourcing to the bigger companies like Bidvest, obviously it must make sense in terms of their pricing, and they can't really price widely outside of the industry norms. I mean, there are going rates in the industry, and I don't think consumers are stupid. You know, they won't go easily to a place which is totally out of line in terms of pricing. And I don't think there's necessarily in this industry an association of better quality related to higher pricing. In fact, I think it may be just the opposite. That if people ask too much for whatever units they process, then I think there may be a comeback on that. So yes, I was surprised by that. Now, whether we find this also in other industries, I think in many industries we find that kind of thing, that what you see, all right, let me change it and say what you get is not necessarily what you see. So I think there may be longer value chains in many industries, obviously depending on the viability of doing that. As soon as you do that, you've got to make provision for things like turnaround time. If that provider doesn't give you turnaround time that will match those that are independent, obviously, you know, you may find yourself at the short end. And so there are lots of considerations. But I must say that, you know, in that entire business model framework, I didn't expect the value chain that emerged in your investigations. I just thought, you know, this would be an internal job, small entrepreneurs. Yes, I knew about some of the larger chains, and obviously I thought that they may have some outsourcing, some value chain behind them, but it appears that some of the smaller ones are the ones who really make use of outsourcing some of the backroom services.
Can I explain to you why I think it is the case?
Yep.
What I saw is that there are a couple of big institutions. Bidvest is one of the biggest, and they cater mainly for hospitals. Big institutions require big towels and sheets and so forth, and they have spare capacity. But to set up a Bidvest plant costs millions of rands. So yeah. I assume, and the processes they employ actually are very automated. Now, by comparison, a small dry cleaning service employs between 5 and 7 people, and it's a small service. But the machine that they utilize costs between 500 and 800,000 rand. So it's not a small capital outlay. So it actually makes sense if you're just a shop front and you're offering a service and you outsource the work to a place like Bidvest to a spare capacity, who has automated machines. So I think that the volumes and the fact that they're automated means that they're also very efficient and profitable. Well, the costs are low, but if you're employing 5 to 6 people for a small enterprise, your profit margins can't be very large. So I think that's where it comes into it. Economies of scale.
So I wasn't, Russell, I wasn't surprised by the fact that these small companies would do that. I was a bit surprised by the fact that Bidvest would be interested in these mice and rats. You know, just thinking, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, that would obviously require a totally different kind of investigation. Just the logistics of getting all of these things from all of these little companies and classifying it and getting it back to them, and so that was quite surprising, because that may be well, it probably is a fairly complex situation that they have to deal with. Question is, for a company like Bidvest, that, as you say, operate mainly in the commercial and the corporate market. I just wonder what is the size, the ratio of all of these smaller companies vis-a-vis the corporates and the commercial companies that's their primary market. So that was quite surprising to me. Hey folks, anything more from your side?
Just from my side, the comment that was just made about Bidvest is actually a bit broader. If you look at the other industries, it's basically the same thing happening there. The bigger companies are targeting smaller projects, smaller target market as well. They need to stay in business. And I see it on a daily basis. Today I had 5 companies that was in my office as well. Same thing is happening there. If you don't diversify and looking at even the smallest of small, just to stay in business, it's tough out there at the moment. So I was actually not surprised with that finding, and expect that probably at this stage, looking at how the little number that's around in our area of dry cleaning companies, it's actually surprising that they haven't already combined efforts to make something bigger out of it for everyone. So every single small business does have the opportunity to make money, but I believe it's going to be a good thing for them if they can decide to combine efforts.
Yeah, well, talking about the diverse offerings that the different companies and some are fairly single-minded and focus on their dry cleaning. Others have their operation into sort of an all-round offering. And as I looked at what you reported in terms of what they do, there seems to be a fairly standardized range of aligned offerings that are offered by the different companies. But as I looked at it, it is clear that any one of those diversified offerings that they added to the core business would also have a different kind of competitive environment. So what makes people want to use their services? Probably convenience, doing everything in one place. But yeah, we have, my wife and I use a dry cleaner, which is highly regarded dry cleaner. And next to it is a shop called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, HID, and they do leatherworks, HID. And so I almost by default, this dry cleaner can only concentrate on dry cleaning and not offer anything in the line of leather products and so on. So yes, it was quite interesting, and once again, it would require much more in-depth investigation to find out what the ratio of revenue generation would be of each of those secondary offerings that these companies have to try to attract more people. Yeah, that'll take something a little more systematic to do that.
Yeah, but what's also surprising is the age of the companies, how long they are in business. And the question I have there, no answer yet, but the question I have there is, to who do they transfer the skills? Yeah, which is quite an interesting situation we're in.
Yeah, well, if outsourcing is a large proportion, or a characteristic of a large proportion of that market. Obviously, the skills are somewhere else. So this is just almost a hollow pipe of handling items rather than having to apply many skills. Just getting back to your remark a little earlier, Russell, although it seems like a big outlet, to get machines and get going, I assume that, once again, I don't have information, but obviously the lifespan of of the technology would be fairly long, and it's not going to require, replacement every now and again. So at the same time, just looking at the entire business, unless you are some leverages with a national footprint or some of the others, I can't see that you are going to create extremely high levels of wealth. It's probably a sustainable revenue, and if you are small and your number of internal stakeholders, the owner and the workers and so on, well, I think it's sustainable in terms of generating a steady income that will keep you, well, maybe a little more than just afloat. But I don't see this as a money spinning industry really, for the small players in the market. But once again, these are assumptions, implicit assumptions, I think.
I think it's interesting. I think that in the small areas where, look, I stay in Benoni, and there, as I said in one report, there were 23 dry cleaners in the region, and it went down to 5. So the 5 that remained are making money. The smallest of the 3 I saw, I would say, is just surviving. But of the other 2, those guys are minting it. The one guy prefers to drive a ML Mercedes-Benz and have a luxury home. The other guy is making lots and lots of money. So I think it's also area dependent as well, where Bidvest wouldn't really afford to put up or offer a service that they do. These guys are still making lots of money by virtue of the fact that there are few of them. They've had the machines for a long time, as you said, so that they capitalized those machines a long time ago. And you're right. I think the machines are relatively long in the tooth. But I was surprised. The one guy was going to do an upgrade, and he was talking about 1.5 million for an upgrade for his storefront, which included two new machines, and a bit of cosmetic work. So it's a fair amount of money. So they must be making money to be able to afford that, I think.
Yeah. So the other thing that emerged here and there, but not too clearly in some of the assignments, although nobody specified it as a very specific segment in the market, but obviously we talked about the postmodern consumers, particularly the young ones that live in flats and busy lifestyles and so on. But there was somebody, I can't recall who it was. I'm not sure whether it was Mai or I'm not too sure. That just referred in passing to the specific and maybe different need patterns in the townships, where access to washing machines, electricity, and so on is really inhibitive of people doing their own thing, and that potentially, if you can explore that market, I think it could offer quite innovative possibilities. But speaking of innovation, and going back to my whole argument of innovation and revolutionaries versus incumbents, just the low business awareness and strategic awareness of this industry leaves it quite wide open for somebody with some good ideas. I think it's become stuck in that's the way we've always done it kind of mode, and obviously there seems to be a high level of parity across all of the operations, and I just think I don't know what, I haven't given that much thought to it, but I think just that state of almost intransigence in the industry makes for a good case for somebody to come in with a very, very novel ideas.
Yeah,
And it goes. Yes, Carl? Yes.
I looked at that case, and just an interesting piece of information. I looked at the geographical distribution of dry cleaners in the West Rand area. And would you guys believe that in this entire Soweto area, there is one dry cleaner? The entire area. And then just north of Soweto, there's a whole bunch, but the entire cluster, like where there's, I don't know, 2 million people, there's one dry cleaner. So yeah, that's where I built my case from.
There's one possible maybe explanation for that. And those that are down to that particular region by virtue of things like unemployment and therefore also low levels of expendable income would probably not use dry cleaning. They do washing and hang it out. And those who do have expendable income, probably those are the ones who commute to the city centers and make use of the service over there. But I would still think that maybe, I'm just speculating it, that wet washing would be something that there may be a market for, a laundromat instead of a dry cleaner, a low cost laundromat. Who knows? I don't know. But it's it's an interesting market. It's obviously one that's not been considered much by marketing studies. I haven't come across too many marketing studies about this industry. Is that a cat?
Gustav, I just wanted to say something very quickly.
Yes,
in terms of income levels in townships, I don't remember where I saw a study, but they actually said that in townships, people have higher disposable income than in the suburbs because these are not people that have bonds or the sorts of expenses that people have in suburbs. Most of those houses are not bonded. And the level of renovations, the money that people spend on renovations and luxury goods is actually much higher than in more affluent areas. I think that there is an opportunity to actually look at providing the services that we don't usually associate with townships to those areas, because what has happened now, if you look at even the value of property in townships, it rises much faster than the value of property in more affluent areas. Because a lot more people are choosing to live there. It's cheaper to live there, and you can actually you can live the lifestyle that you like at a much cheaper price. So I think it's actually a huge opportunity to expand into areas like that, especially in this personal services market. There are many, I can't say new industries, but new businesses that are popping up in the townships, and these people are really making money. If you look at the area, I can't remember the street name, but where the Mandela House is, the
Vilakazi Street.
Vilakazi Street, exactly. The properties in that road are valued at over 2 million rand each, and these are 300 square meter properties, and nobody wants to sell because it's a real cash cow. And I think that there's quite an opportunity to actually explore that specific demographic when it comes to personal services, luxury goods, and the sorts of products that haven't been marketed there traditionally.
Yeah. So the point that I made a little earlier, those people, and yes, I'm aware of that. But obviously, yes, they're not shackled by routine expenses every month, and so they are almost more cash-based in their behavior. But the point that I made was that those people that have that cash at their disposal are probably the ones that are also physically more mobile and that have the ability to go to other places in lieu of not having something there. But at the same time, and this goes back many years, when I had Clark Shoes as a client, and the daily life circumstances of people in different kind of segments in society. Particularly at that time, we still differentiated between the so-called black market and white market, which is not the case anymore. We don't differentiate that anymore, at least not clearly. Here and there we talk about black diamonds and so on. But nevertheless, because of the long distances that people from the townships have to walk to get to transport, and from transport points to work, their purchases, they spend their money in buying shoes on much more expensive shoes than the general white market. And they were also particularly aware of the comfort factor because of the long walking distances. Now, I can give you some examples too. Other examples, I once did advertising for Castor Oil. In fact, the payoff line that you now see is a payoff line I wrote in 1982. Well, a part of it, when I said more than just an oil. Castor, more than just an oil. Now they've got, and I changed it from liquid technology. I think that was a term, that was the payoff line that I got when we run the account, and I changed to liquid engineering, and I changed that because it didn't make sense to the people who used most of the large volume oil purchases. Those were people who service their own cars. Well, the affluent would go to the garage and say, "You check my oil and fill it up." And the tenant said, what oil do you want? They said, "Anyone. Just fill it up." While those who service their own cars, once again, going back to the townships, those people they were extremely knowledgeable about the technical differences between different grades of oil and even different brands of oil. So all I'm saying to you is that there are clearly discernible patterns, and I don't think we've explored specifically in this market, and I think you make very valid comments there. We haven't explored those kinds of different almost antecedents of behavior. We have a kind of an one size fits all approach, it seems to be, in the industry, and we haven't explored that too much. But I think, once again, there are many opportunities, as you point out.
How does one get access to information like that?
Yeah, many instances, obviously, those are proprietary information. Every industry has secondary resources that can give you overviews of the industry, but not all players in this industry are too keen to report everything about themselves to such a omnibus kind of report. So they do withhold some information, but there are, in most industries, you probably find some. And if you go to, for instance, Department of State and Industry, they would have very good information about that. Even Department of the Statistical Service, what's it called now? Used to be Department of Statistics. They would have that kind of information. And there are some other databases that you can use to get that kind of information. But when you do very specific research, and I can give you so many examples. Maybe I'll talk about when we see each other in not this Friday, Saturday, but next Saturday, because I think it is still a very relevant debate. And you know, I think partly and rightly so, for some political correctness reasons, we tried to evade this topic, but I think there are still some very clear differences between the different population groups in terms of the behavior. Now, LSMs have come to override those kinds of differences, and at that time we didn't have LSMs. It was called Social Monitor, and we had 4 different Social Monitor typologies for different population groups, and those were clearly very different from each other. But I think there's been a lot of integration in terms of behavior, and I do think that for a large part, parity of income levels will be a better explainer of behavior than population groups, but there are still clearly some, maybe I'll give you some examples. In industries such as male perfume body sprays, for instance, and the way in which it was advertised at the time, I'll tell you about that, clear differences. There again, I did the advertising for Flymo lawnmowers, and there were very clear differences, and lawnmowers were not used in townships, obviously, at the time, but there were clear differences between rural communities, and particularly Afrikaans communities, and urban communities. And I had to take some action, did research and take some action, because when we look at the main differentiator of the Flymo machine, it was its maneuverability and its nimbleness, so to speak, because it was on an airbed, like a, what do we call those things that they use? That kind of thing. Hovercraft, yes, that was the way in which. But then our execution, to illustrate that, we had a ballet dancer, as the representation of this, but that didn't go well in the platteland, in the rural areas, having a ballet dancer. That lawnmower didn't go well down in. So we had to, but I'll tell you about that next Saturday. I'm just saying to you that there are sometimes there are inbuilt idiosyncrasies in these different segments that if you don't take note of it, you may find yourself wasting good opportunities.
Gustav, this third assignment, by comparison to the first and second, seems quite simplistic, because it's based on a set of questions that you ask a bunch of respondents, and you can start putting together some, well, the majority of the answers are similar. There are some outliers, but it's not rocket science. It just seems to be that there is a generalization or of viewpoints about what the service should provide or shouldn't provide. So it seems like a simplistic assignment by comparison.
Not really. Obviously, this assignment should be informed by what you found by speaking to the dry cleaners. And, I think it became quite clear that the dry cleaning operations are not necessarily market-led. Just a number of examples, asking about the preferences of handing in and delivery. Collecting and delivery is clearly one thing. The other thing is obviously that you need to probe a little is the portfolio of differentiated services, whether that's an attraction or not. It is quite interesting that quite a number of you said that these, particularly the dry cleaners located in malls, are mostly at the entrance, easily accessible. Is that really important to them? So, I think you just got to put yourself in the shoes of the consumers and maybe ask, what, for instance, what is a realistic turnaround time? Those are the little things that obviously we can make implicit assumptions about that by just looking at what you've done so far, but it's not necessarily what the consumers experience and want. To what extent do they actually make use would they go to a dry cleaner with an expanded or extended service offering? Is that something? Is that a draw card? How cumbersome is it for them to bring a load of washing or dry cleaning? And I'm surprised that normally my own experience, but I don't know, I'm not the norm. But it's very seldom that we would ever take one then more garment at a time to dry cleaner. So there once again, question is: do you wait until you've got 4 or 5 garments before you take it to the dry cleaner, or do you take it when you've got all of those kinds of little things that you can explore a little. Now I'm sitting here and doing your assignment for you, Russell. So just be a little creative and put yourself a bit in the shoes of the customer, asking pertinent questions. But once again, I'm not going to look at the exhaustiveness of the questions that you asked. I mean, how long is a piece of string? You can play this like a concertina, but I think it will give you some revelation if you ask a couple of customers a couple of questions.
Well, the reality is you can't keep the person on the phone or on the line too long either. So even though I was offered 2 jobs today as a teleconsultant, the reality is that people only have limited time to answer your questions. So you've got to be quite quick and quite selective.
Yeah, and it's not for nothing that the POPI Act is now coming into being, because the first words you normally say when you do telephone interviews, if that's what you want to do, you can obviously do a couple of more intercepts talking to people as they come out of the shops. Then you're sure you got the right consumer or the right respondent. But if you do telephone interviews, normally these days you start with say, I'm not selling you anything. This is a research project, because people don't want to be accosted by telephone. And so, yes, you've got to be sensitive about that. But even I'm not expecting you to necessarily go to unknown people. Go to a couple of friends and just get some information. We're not looking here at a perfect research project. We're looking at getting to understand the industry.
There's a distinct difference between the local African industry and that of Europe. That's for certain. And you're quite right in the assumption that we are open right now, very vulnerable for change. What I'm saying is, at the moment, the clientele are a bit like sheep, and they just and they go to the closest dry cleaner. And they don't ask too many questions, but it takes one clever player or a couple of clever players to change the perception completely. But at the moment, there aren't many clever players out there.
Yeah. So there again, just talking about garments. Another client that I dealt with quite a number of years ago was the wool and mohair producers of South Africa, and our wool producers here in South Africa thought of wool as a wintry fiber. And where Europe started to look at it in different ways, in fact, the entire industry here had to change their approach and look at lower microns of wool to deliver or to offer to the industry as a whole. Particularly, we are a major supplier to. As we are in most of our industries, we don't process our stuff. We just send it overseas, which is kind of stupid. But that's still the mold that we find ourselves in. And in that instance too, they suddenly found themselves irrelevant, because they kept on providing wool microns for wintry stuff, and wool became a summer garment industry in Europe. So yeah, those kinds of things too. Okay, we are almost done. Shingi, do you think they've talked enough?
Actually, Shingi made me the host. He had to excuse himself a bit earlier.
Okay, bye. Anything else from anybody?
Just one question. I don't think it's really linked to marketing, but I was just wondering from an industry, what's the impact of having a laundry or dry cleaning body or association would do to the industry? Because one of the things that I did was Google and try to see if any, besides being part of a franchise, if any of the dry cleaners and laundry owners were members of an association. I see that most, mainly in the US, you have conventions and so on, but in South Africa, I couldn't find anything of that nature. And I was just wondering what the impact of such a body would be in the industry.
Yeah, that's a good point. Obviously, you get these kinds of associations that are based on voluntary association, and then you get regulatory bodies. Now, depending on the kind of regulatory sets that they put into place, it can be beneficial to the industry. But when you get macro regulatory bodies, and where you get an economy that is overregulated, like we have in South Africa, you make it virtually impossible for people to be innovative. And yes, obviously there are some protection measures needed, not only in the consumers or the users of services, but also obviously in the employment framework of a particular industry. So, there once again, there are many different views on regulation. In many professions, there was, instead of regulation, the term that was used was professionalization. So you find, for instance, SAMRA, South African Market Research Association, if you want to do business, it's to your benefit to be a registered member there, but then you have to comply to certain ethical standards. And you have to toe the line in terms of industry standards of pricing and so on. And the same with PRISA, Public Relations Institute of South Africa. So those bodies talk more about professionalization rather than regulation. So when it comes to regulation, it's probably a mix of ensuring ethical behavior and complying with standards. But if it becomes too regulated, and I'm currently dealing with one client who is the largest black-owned insurance company in the country, and like everybody else, they have to toe the line of the FSB. But at the same time, they're not a big company, they are growing, but it is absolutely dismal to see how many of their people are kept busy for what time of the year, just meeting all the compliance regulations. And so you can easily find yourself in a situation where you slow down, and particularly you disable some of the smaller companies in an industry through overregulation. While the bigger companies that can appoint a full-time legal department and so on, it's easier because they can afford it. They've got the resources. But when it comes to the smaller companies, those are the ones that are arguably most negatively influenced by regulation. Okay, so we have here clearly an industry with lots of small players. So we need to regulate them? I don't think so. Do we need to maybe professionalize them? Yeah, I think that would be a good idea. I'm not quite sure what that body that you're referring to really plays. Some of them are just dormant, and it's people just join it because it's the right thing to do. But in many instances, there are no clear benefits to it. I've withdrawn from some of these industry bodies because I don't find any benefits. But then I'm fortunate that I've gone to a level of work and standing that I don't necessarily need to be associated with them to be accepted in the market. So, yeah, that makes sense to you. Last comment. We've got 2 minutes left.
Yeah, just one from me.
Yes, Neil.
Yes. Just a quick one regarding the mark allocation. With my opinion, most of the comments or the feedback was quite, and I found it misaligned to the mark that I and so I just wanted to sort of have an understanding.
Just to repeat, he is asking questions about my mark allocation. Now, the last thing I want to do at this level, and you would have noticed that, is to take a piece of work and break it down in 6 paragraphs and give 3 for this and 5 for this and that. And I think you ought to be beyond that. So yes, you can say, doesn't that make me impressionistic and maybe inconsistent in allocating marks to people? All I can say that I've been in this game long enough to be able to make a call on the differential quality of different people. Now, either you can use a standardized set, such as giving clusters of marks for certain paragraphs and almost make it a mechanical exercise, or you need to look at the level at which people operate. Clearly, there are some people that operate just in terms of both their thinking processes, their ability to show integration, and unfortunately also the formulation of the assignments do play a role. But if I've given you a mark, I'm pretty confident that that's what you deserve. That makes sense to you. I know it's people want to know, why did you give me only this? And if you start comparing yourself to others, I think it'll be a mistake, because then you need to do micro-analysis of each other's assignments. So what can I say? Like the dentist, trust me. I've done this for a long time. At this level. Okay, folks, I think that's all. I think we all need to leave the meeting now. Have a lovely evening further. And yes, looking forward to your next endeavors, and really looking forward, and with excitement, but also a bit of sadness even now that the next time I see you will be the last time. So see you again. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.